we're back with another episode of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. The real kickoff to Season 5 of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here from Inside Sports Fantasy Football. We also go ahead and have some great shows on the queue. Pop Culture Cosmos, where we cover the latest news and trends of pop culture each and every week, twice a week, wherever you get your podcasts and on radio stations worldwide, including this special episode of the Pop Culture Cosmos combined with Inside Sports Fantasy Football. So go ahead and check us out on either of those channels. Plus also as well, the Lakers Fast Break, where we cover the NBA and the Lakers like no one else. Also as well, the Dom-ination Sports Nation. Go ahead and check out Chris Lardieri and his awesome son, Dom, as they go ahead and cover the sports world like no one else. Right there for you at the Dom-ination Sports Nation. If you got any questions for us, always ISFF right there for you. isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com or Inside Sports FF on Twitter. That's isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com or Inside Sports FF on Twitter. We're also on Threads. We're also on Instagram. And also, you can go ahead on the Pop Culture Cosmos, where you see this video on YouTube. Please subscribe today on YouTube at the Pop Culture Cosmos so you get the latest notifications on when we go live on the air with the latest Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Well, I'm telling you what, it's going to be another great season on hand of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. The ISFF is back, and just glad to go ahead and see that the games are going to be for real here in the not too distant future. September 7th is when the NFL season starts. And we are here today to go ahead and give you a special 1-hour preview on what to look forward to, the trends, the good and the bad, and the strategies you might implement in your upcoming fantasy football draft. And here today to talk about all the great things that you can know about fantasy football. Good man indeed. You got to go ahead and check him out along with his awesome son, Dominic Lardieri. It is Chris Lardieri, and Chris back again for a 5th season officially of Inside Sports Fantasy Football.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me back. And I can't believe it's 5 seasons already. I don't know where the time's going.
I'll tell you what, it started with the Pay Dirt podcast I did. Just had a great time doing that. You were doing the Inside Sports shows yourself, and you were having a great time doing that as well. We decided to go ahead and merge these shows together due to circumstance, and it's been a great time. I heard maybe even the Lakers Fast Break guys may or may not stop by as well because they're avid fantasy football players. It has become so large and so huge, fantasy football. I know we just go back on the nostalgia trip to start every season about back to when we were doing it on the books, the magazines, and had it all notebooks and did it all on paper, and we're looking on newspapers and all that other stuff as far as magazines, 500, 700 page magazines, as far as trying to look through it all to make sure we got the right guy. Well, those days are long in the past for many of us. Today, it's all about digital. We're doing it on apps. We're doing it online. There's money involved, maybe not. It's either for free leagues, paid leagues, keeper leagues. There's different associations as far as PPR, or we're talking about Superflex, all these different things that are out there. It's so much more complicated out there for a lot of individuals if they are really, really want to get into it. But for the casual players, I still can say without a doubt that if you just want to go into a league and play, Chris, you could do just that.
Absolutely. And I think the only stipulation I'd add to that is you've got to have some sort of a PPR league. I've been playing so long, I remember there wasn't even a half a point or a point per reception. So as long as your league has that, whatever scoring combinations you want to use, whether it's 4 or 6 for a throwing touchdown, super flex, get rid of the tight end, get rid of the kicker. Some leagues have individual defensive players. I really don't care as long as you've got some form of PPR.
Absolutely. So again, if you're just a casual player out there, you see all these acronyms and letters being floated around, don't worry. Just go to an ESPN, go to a Yahoo, or go to a well-known fantasy football site, start up, get in the middle of a draft, and just have fun. Because that's what it comes down to, my friend. A lot of people take this seriously, like becomes their life. I understand that. I get that. But for millions of us out there, they're just playing on the weekend just to have some.
Absolutely. And as we said over the years on this show, it's a reason to watch football. I mean, there were years when I don't know a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars weren't great, but maybe you had one of their receivers or their kicker, for instance. It gave you a reason to watch the game. I know, yeah, a lot of degenerate gamblers have that same logic when it comes to betting on football, but I feel with fantasy football, it's a different story. You're watching the game. You're sometimes you're even looking for players. You watch a game, maybe a running back gets hurt, his backup comes in, like, hey, this guy looks pretty good. I think I want him on my fantasy team. So it's not just rooting for a team to cover the spread or go over under on a point total. I mean, you're really getting into the granular
Just tell you what, it's just a great
nitty gritty of what players are going to do well this week for me.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, my friend. Absolutely great season. Already the questions are abound. Somebody in the chat through the wire is actually going to start his first, possibly contemplating his first fantasy football league. I was just going to put it in the chat, but I'll just say it out here. Start off with a free league. Keep it low stress, keep it low cost. Just go into a free league with ESPN or Yahoo. Go with the basis there. Just get in a random league, or if you have a one with your friends where they're just going to keep it just cool and calm and nobody's going to get really just out of hand on it, then go ahead and do that. But if you just get in a random league, you go ahead. The draft is really the fun part for everybody out there. Whether or not you stick to it week after week after week, that's where the separation of players is. So, first thing I tell people, just go and try and do what you can to have fun. Stay involved with your league week in, week out. Players will always drop off after about 5 or 6 weeks because they feel they have no chance. With the extra week added in, I can tell you safely, my friend, as you and I have both experienced in recent years, it doesn't matter if you start off slow, you always have a chance to compete and win in fantasy football.
Absolutely. I mean, last year in our league together, Dom and I, our team is doing really well. And what happened the first week of the playoffs? We picked the wrong quarterback. We didn't start Trevor Lawrence in the rain in the Meadowlands, and you end up beating us. And one great season goes out the window. The key with fantasy football is a lot like with some of these other sports that have so many teams that make the playoffs. The goal is to get into the playoffs. Once you get there, it's a brand new season. So don't despair if you start 0-3, 1-4. I mean, sometimes there's a player you can get out on waivers or swing a trade. It'll turn your whole season around.
Absolutely. And what I'm doing in the chat is I'm actually going to post a link for those that are looking as far as for easy references. I'm going to post the ESPN link for their top fantasy football rankings. I think they're top 200 players. That gives you an idea exactly what to look for. I'm also going to give you out there a chance, if you're in the chat, to go ahead and look at this. This is the fantasy football leaders from last season, which you can use as a reference as well. So that should give you the basis while you're going ahead and choosing or picking out or waiting or selecting as far as who you want to go ahead and choose for their next player. Plus, it gives you between drafts. Fantasy football drafts always seem to go slow, Chris. So it always gives you a chance for your next 1-2 picks, not only to investigate exactly what players of need you're looking at, but also if those players are healthy and ready to play some games for their respective teams.
Absolutely, and if you're doing a draft, whether it be online or in person, have your phone, tablet, computer, whatever it is with you, because once you make that one pick and you look at who you've taken, who you've got left on your draft board, it's time to strategize. All right, do I need another receiver here? Do I need a running back? And when you really get into those mid to late rounds and you're looking at a running back and you're like, hey, I like this guy. He did well last year. Why is he still out there? What happened? By all means, Google, look on Twitter, see, maybe he got demoted a day before on the depth chart, or maybe he tweaked a hammy and it's unknown how long he'll be out for, a week or a month. So you've always got to do your diligence. There's a reason guys fall in fantasy football. And for the most part, it has something to do with some sort of news. I mean, there are those rare occasions where you're like, this guy's fallen. Has everyone forgotten about him? And you'll get those occasional steals. But either way, be prepared to do your diligence in between picks.
Once again, it is Chris Lardieri from Dom-ination Sports Nation. Go ahead and check him out today, wherever you get your podcasts. Him and his son do an awesome job. So please go ahead and check out Chris and Dom with the Dom-ination Sports Nation, wherever you get your podcasts. My friend, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start off the conversation as far as from a broad basis on fantasy football, the area that for years has traditionally been the go to position for the majority of team owners out there, and that is running back. The position of running back has changed and evolved. A lot of people will tell you has not evolved for the best due to the more reliance from the virtual majority of teams out there on the passing game. So the reliance on a running back is not as prevalent as it once was. So therein lies the conundrum, my friend. The running backs are still a wanted commodity, but the draft pool of expected running backs that we can be sure of outside of injury to get you numbers has seemingly dwindled in recent years, and especially this year, from what they once were to what they are now.
Absolutely. And, I feel like every year up until the last maybe year or two, there'd be a running back at the top of the consensus draft boards in the preseason. And this year, I don't see that. I see it's any number of wide receivers. I see some running backs that are near the top, but like you said, between the injuries, the running back by committees that a lot of teams have, there aren't those proverbial studs that are out there. I mean, we had Derrick Henry, and I feel now as his career goes on, maybe he's got a little tread on those tires and he's starting to slow down. But I mean, for instance, we had Austin Eckler last year. He was a clear number one. He also caught the ball out of the backfield. Great pick for our team. He's back again this year, kind of ticked off with his contract situation. But hard to say, with a new offensive coordinator, I'm sure that'll benefit him. But I mean, there was Christian McCaffrey, for instance, but he's injury prone. So not like the old days where, in his prime, you'd say like, all right, Ezekiel Elliott's a guy you could take at the top, someone like that. We don't have that anymore. And so what you're seeing now is the quote unquote experts out there have caught on and said, you know what, you got to pick top three, whether it's a 10 or 12 team league with a snake draft, you better get yourself a stud wide receiver and worry about a running back in the second or third round, because you're not going to get the bang for your buck other than a handful of running backs, like you mentioned.
That's something I want to talk to you about, because for casual players, those familiar names like Ezekiel Elliott, who just signed with the Patriots, so who knows whether or not he's going to get the opportunity to start, play a lot, or if he's going to be a backup. The traditional big names that have normally been for the past 5-7 years the names to go to in your fantasy draft are no longer the case. And for casual players, just saying, oh my gosh, you know, Ezekiel Elliott, he's not on my list of the top 3 rounds. What's going on? And, I'm just throwing him as an example, but there are other names that are just like, familiar names that are not going to be there at the top, or if you try to select them at the top, will definitely not be a good thing for you to choose that far up in the draft.
Absolutely. And I mean, another guy in the news recently is Dalvin Cook. I mean, he was great with the Vikings. They got rid of him. He was a salary cap casualty. The Jets turn around and pick him up, and you think, wow, he'll be great with Aaron Rodgers. Well, they've got this rookie who, were it not for a knee injury, probably would have been rookie of the year last year, named Brees Hall. So will Cook be the feature back in New York? Maybe, if Hall's still recuperating. What I've seen online the last few days, it looks like he's running well, but he's not going to be the primary back with the Jets this year. And a year or two ago, you might have wanted to take him, knowing he was the main guy in Minnesota. So look at names of guys you like, but like we said earlier, do your
Dalvin
homework.
Cook, like
look
you
at
said,
that depth chart. Yep, gotta just look at those depth charts and see where these guys fit into their new teams, or even if there's a coaching change or an injury or some other issue going on.
people also need to be aware, Chris, about players, since the running back position has changed to where there's a lot more opportunity for a player to achieve some short-term success. Let's say a third or fourth rounder rookie, or someone that's been lower on the depth chart, like, sitting in the back, waiting to go ahead and be a big time player, or an undrafted kid that literally they just get off the street and just put them in the starting lineup and they can flourish. It all depends on the offense, the offensive scheme. We've seen that in recent years where these total unknowns or unexpected players in traditional years gone by who would not be able to thrive, now all of a sudden you could pull out 1,000 yard, 7, 8, 10 touchdown season from some of these guys. And those guys you have to be aware of that, maybe during the second, third, or fourth game season, you pick them up and they can really go a long way for you on your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't judge a body of work based on the first couple weeks of the season. And more importantly to that, not a lot of people realize this. There are 3 preseason games, and every team has a bye week that Labor Day weekend before the season starts. So that's one less game with reps. The 3 games these teams play, for the most part, the starters maybe play a series or two, if not at all, like Sean McVay has liked to do with the Rams. So really, weeks 1 and 2 are almost like preseason for some of these guys, getting into game shape, getting accustomed to a new offense, a new quarterback, whatever the case is.
Once again, it is Chris Lardieri and me, Gerald Glassford. It is Inside Sports Fantasy Football, our 2023 Fantasy Football preview. Thanks so much for joining us on both the Inside Sports Fantasy Football and Pop Culture Cosmos channels. Truly appreciate everyone around the world checking us out all over the place on radio and podcasts. Our first question of the day, my friend, because the fantasy football fans, they're coming. They always come, and it's always great to hear from them. You could always go ahead, isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com or Inside Sports FF on Twitter/X. You can go ahead and ask us questions at any time on that. Yadhir Pada, Yadvir Pada says, trade away Eckler for Lamb and Waller. His current tight end situation is Taysom Hill, and current running backs are Sanders, Madison, and Jamal Williams. This is for a PPR. Your thoughts on that, my friend?
I don't think that's a bad idea. Being a Giant fan, I know they're very optimistic about Waller in camp, but the X factor with him is he going to stay healthy? That was his problem in Vegas with the Raiders. But I think it's worth looking into, especially because, as we alluded to with Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison's now the guy in Minnesota. So I feel like, yeah, you're giving up Eckler, but I almost feel like there might be some sort of reversion to the mean with Eckler. He had such a great year last year, and with a new offensive coordinator, I think Herbert was throwing more short passes last year with Lombardi as offensive coordinator, whereas I think Kellen Moore will probably want him to air it out. You may call me nuts, but went to training camp with Dom a couple weekends ago and saw Herbert with his band of receivers, and he looks as great as ever, and he was throwing deep. So not to diminish Eckler's value or potential this year, but I do think what you're getting in return could be a fair, equal, if not maybe greater value. What do you think, Gerald?
And Eckler's situation is so tough to gauge right now. So can you get everybody up to speed on that? Because that was I brought up, I was going to have this conversation with you tonight. Austin Eckler was, his tenuous situation heading into these fantasy football drafts. A lot of people are asking about his contract situation and like. Your thoughts on what's going on with Austin Eckler?
I think, didn't he organize that whole Zoom call or whatever it was with all the disgruntled all the running backs? Yeah, and I think the impetus for that was Saquon Barkley getting franchised and then saying, I'm not showing up, and then a week goes by and they come to terms on a 1-year deal that everyone thought was fair. But
yeah, that call worked out well, didn't it?
Yeah, it's just the market. It's the way the football free market has been working. They devalue running backs when it comes to salary cap, partially because they spend so much on quarterbacks and the offensive linemen that protect them, pass rushers on defense. So the price of running backs has been pushed down
because they see it as more interchangeable than other positions.
Exactly. And as we said, a lot of these teams don't think you need a starting running back like the Cowboys had with Elliott. And then they look and, oh, look, we got Tony Pollard, who was not a first round pick out of Ohio State like Zeke. And we feel there's more value there. They can be replaced. So whether the Chargers have that, I don't know. But judging by what they just paid Justin Herbert, they're not going to pay Eckler. So will he be disgruntled? Will he really be paying for money? I'm not sure, but just found it ironic that kind of Saquon Barkley was the poster child for this whole Eckler call, and then a week later went by the wayside, and we didn't hear much out of it after that. But I don't see him getting a payday with the Chargers. Maybe he's looking to set the market as a free agent, but even then, once there's a certain age in the NFL, and teams aren't going to admit this, they're not going to pay running backs over a certain age or a certain number of carries or yards. They just feel like they're a car and they've got too many miles on them.
Before we go ahead and talk about the quarterbacks, which is a major part of what we're going to be talking about this season in fantasy football, is every year, whether or not it's injuries or surprises or top performers, quarterback is always a position that we like to talk about on the show. Yadvir has one more quick question. Mike Evans for Pitts. I would probably lean at Mike Evans for Pitts. I just who is it? What did there was a receiver for? It was Gage, Russell Gage. That's right. So Mike Evans is probably, if that's the case, Mike Evans might get more volume, I should say, because of that injury. So your thoughts on Mike Evans for Pitts?
So normally I'd like Evans. The problem, and I agree with you, he'll probably have more looks now that Gage is out. Um, it's Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask at quarterback. It's not Tom Brady anymore. So you've got to worry about it from that perspective. I like Pitts. I had him last year. He underachieved. Now, I'm not saying Desmond Ritter is lights out better than either of the Tampa quarterbacks, but I do feel in that offense and with the arrival of B. John Robinson, you would think Pitts is not going to be as easy to key on as he was in previous years. So I think at the very least, Pitts probably has more upside than Evans.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, he's leaning. I'm leaning more Mike Evans. I think he still has at least one more top year to go. But you're right. The quarterback situation there is tenuous. Baker Mayfield can find some of the magic he had with the Rams, but you don't know which Baker Mayfield you're going to get. So that's good. Some good thoughts right there for you. Speaking of what we're talking about with quarterbacks, my friend, quarterbacks in new places, but also as well quarterback as a position as a whole. Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and of course Patrick Mahomes have solidified themselves as the top three quarterbacks out there. You know me, I prioritize quarterbacks higher than most people as far as reaching for them in the draft sooner than most people like. It's worked out for me for the most part for the teams that I've actually been able to choose more times than not. It's worked out for me. I will say, though, that with a player like Derek Carr, who has left the Raiders lifestyle for New Orleans, for him, it's going to be interesting because they can't seem to field a healthy running back on that team. Your thoughts on Derek Carr before we get into some really heavy talk on who's at the top of the list for quarterbacks?
On paper, you would think, definitely agree the running back situation in New Orleans is cause for concern. But he's got weapons, especially at wide receiver. I like Olave a lot. But it's Derek Carr. You never know what you're going to get with him. I mean, he had one lights out year with the Raiders. Everyone thought John Gruden was going to fix him when the team moved to Vegas. He's just never been able to put it together. Was it a Raider thing? Was it coaching? I'm not quite sure, but I'm not as high on him as a fantasy quarterback as others might be. I'm sure they'll miss Kamara in that offense, but I just
He
feel
has no
like,
choice but to pass, right?
yeah, that's what they're going to have to do for now. But I think too, like he just strikes me as a guy who, when no one's open downfield, his default is to dump or look over the middle. And I mean, that benefited Darren Waller when he was healthy a few years ago in Vegas. Might be good for whoever the Saints tight end is these days, besides Taysom Hill. But I don't know how he's going to put it together with that team in New Orleans. Not trying to knock Carr, but I think this is kind of a make or break situation for him.
That's true. A problem child. He has looked good in the preseason, but that's another thing before we get into the quarterbacks. How much can you take from preseason? A lot of fantasy football owners, especially on the inexperienced side, they always have, oh, wow, he looked really good in preseason game. And, it's to me, when you talk about preseason games, it's usually not what you should be seeing. To me, there's I only take little tidbits as far as players who may be able to contribute maybe on the back end of my draft and things of that nature, but I don't take as much as other coaches, other team owners, other fantasy football players may from the what goes on during the exhibition season.
Yeah, I don't take much at all. I mean, I'll casually watch games here or there if there's not a heck of a lot else on, and baseball these days doesn't seem to be as compelling as a preseason game. But um, honestly, unless it's like Anthony Richardson starting against the Bills last week, and hearing some feedback about, oh, he made a bad throw, and then the guy ends up getting named starter anyway. So I think even what the teams are feeding you, what they say about preseason performance is a lot of smoke screen too. So not a lot other than, I mean, for me, I think the biggest story of the preseason was Joe Burrow tweaking his calf and no one really knowing how long he'd be out for. And that had nothing to do with the preseason game. So for me, I think it's more like health, or maybe a guy coming back from an injury, like I mentioned earlier, Brees Hall. Maybe you want to monitor if he gets a few reps, right? He looks like he's good. He looks like he's still got that speed. Or a quarterback maybe improving their accuracy, or if their arm didn't look as strong the year before, maybe you can get something like that. But for the most part, I think it has little or no value.
Once again, I'm here with Chris Lardieri from the Dom-ination Sports Nation. It is the quarterback position we're talking about right now, which is a major part of what you should be looking at during the fantasy football season. Some players they hold off on quarterbacks. Some owners they've hold off till later rounds, thinking, I can just get a guy who's going to throw me 25 touchdowns. I'm all good. I'm all good. I prioritize a little bit higher. Obviously, I mentioned the first names that should have fantastic seasons when you have Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. It's interesting, oh my friend. Jalen Hurts is getting a lot more press in regards to possibly being ahead of Mahomes and Allen. Your thoughts on possibly having Jalen Hurts as the number one option for quarterbacks this upcoming fantasy football
I
draft?
don't, yeah, I don't think that's out of line at all. And I would have never said that last year. And the reason being is while Mahomes runs a lot and he gets his fair share of running touchdowns, he nowhere near is going to have the production running wise that Hurts will. And I'm going to go off on a little editorial rant here, but when the NFL refuses to change the law that a goal line offense turns into a rugby match and half the team can push Hurts into the end zone, I think as a fantasy owner, you have to take that into account. That's good for Hurts. I mean, it's still legal. I don't fault the Eagles for trying it, but Hurts is definitely going to benefit from that. And I think, too, another year under his belt, I think he's only going to get better. And let's face it, he plays in the NFC. It's the inferior conference. So competition-wise, I think he's poised to put up some big numbers again this year.
All I say is how Ron Rivera keeps finding a job in the league as a head coach is beyond me.
And
And
keeping.
yeah, and keeping it. You know what, Eric Bieniemy. I know he's laid the heavy on his team this year, and they're all complaining. But if you have the record of the Commanders, they need all the hard ass guys to go ahead and be tough as they can be right now because they need all the help they can get there in the DC area. I do want to go ahead and say though, I agree with you that Hurts is primed to have a great season once again. It could be very well that he ends up being the number one quarterback in the league, but my gosh, man, it's so hard to stray away from Mahomes. Mahomes has been doing it just in and every year, regardless of health, regardless of issues. He's been the primary mover. He looks like he's still able to go ahead and be at the top of the league once again.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with either one. I mean, at that point, it's probably a matter of personal preference, and there's no wrong answer if you ask me. But I do feel the gap between Mahomes and Hurts has narrowed, and not just on the field. You saw it in the Super Bowl last year, but in fantasy land. So if you're in that position and you're able to pick either of those guys, just enjoy it. Be happy.
You should, yeah, absolutely, because I think there's a lot of good quarterbacks at the top of the charts that can really get you going. And definitely we'll go ahead and cover that more in the coming weeks right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football. But once again, it is Chris Lardieri. Please go ahead and check him out today, along with his awesome son, Dominic Lardieri. You can go ahead and check them both out at the Dom-ination Sports Nation. It is, of course, Inside Sports Fantasy Football, the true kickoff. Give you some teasers right after the draft and all that. But this is the true start to season 5 of Inside Sports Fantasy Football, the fantasy football preview now on the Pop Culture Cosmos and Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Thanks so much again for watching and listening. Truly appreciate it. I do want to ask you, though, Chris, when it comes to some sleeper quarterbacks, as was mentioned in the chat,
Mhm.
Who are some quarterbacks that you're keeping an eye on, possibly being there for you in the middle rounds, maybe the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds of your draft that you think can really play at a great level this upcoming season?
Sure. So let me preface this by saying, Gerald, I was one of those guys who say you can wait and get a quarterback. I did it last year. We got Russell Wilson, and our team was crap for the rest of the season. And in another league, we ended up having to use Geno Smith and Trevor Lawrence. We got far with those guys, but by the end of the season, I was like, can I just squeeze another 5, 10 points out of my quarterback? So I don't think it's crazy to reach. It's not like the old days 20 years ago where you can take a quarterback at 1 or 2 and people wouldn't look at you funny. But I do think once the Hertzes and the Mahomes of the world come off the board, you better start looking at a quarterback because everyone's going to follow suit. But, you could still wait. You can't wait till the 8th round like the good old days. But like you said, you got to be in the 4th, 5th, 6th round eyeing a guy who's a tier 2, tier 3 quarterback. I don't know if this guy's underrated. I mentioned him twice tonight. I had him last year, but I think this is the year Trevor Lawrence makes the leap. He's kind of forgotten because he plays in the AFC, plays in the atrocious AFC South. But I really like what I saw from him last year. I think, barring
Tell us how
injury,
you really feel, my
I
friend.
mean, and the funny thing is, I'm being kind of neutral on that. I could say a lot more, but I think this is a year he makes a jump. Year 3, I think he learned Doug Peterson's offense. This is a team that could have easily beaten the one ankle Mahomes in the division playoff game last year, but I think he's only going to get better. I mean, and I don't want to say he's kind of a sleeper, but I feel like people are sleeping on him with the stud quarterbacks in the AFC. After Mahomes, you've got Burrow and Herbert and Allen, and it's almost like he's fallen by the wayside. So that's one guy I definitely keep an eye on.
There's also for me, I think, as far as a quarterback that I think people should look out for. I no, I he had such a good season. A lot of people are already writing him off to doing it again, but Geno Smith again. When Russell Wilson left, people thought, "Oh, this guy's a career backup. He's not going to do anything." But he has the career season of his life: 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Absolutely happy for him because, again, of what he was thought to be, he turned out to be something else. I think he can do it again or something close to that. I'm not expecting 30 and 11, maybe something like 25 and 15, something like that, throwing for, 3,000 plus yards, gets you good numbers, a solid, steady starter on a pretty good fantasy football team. Your thoughts? Can Geno Smith strike twice once again for Seattle?
I think he can. And, with Kenneth Walker, the starter at running back for a full season, they drafted a wide receiver. I think he's got the weapons. And then, too, Geno's always a threat to run, so he can get you some running touchdowns, too. So if you are going to wait, I think that's a good alternative. I know some people, if you want to go a little deeper, are optimistic on the way Kenny Pickett played in Pittsburgh down the stretch, and they think, his sophomore season's going to be a big one. That might be another, like that's kind of more of a deep sleeper that people may want to keep an eye on. I saw some quote unquote experts talking about Anthony Richardson, and look, I think he's a phenomenal talent, and he has the ability to be kind of like a Hurts type player. But the guy's so inexperienced. I think he played 12 games in college. I would not draft him as a QB1. You want to take a flyer and speculate on him as your backup, great. But I caution people from believing the hype on him. I don't care how physically talented he is. The NFL is a way different game than college.
All right, I'll ask you since you're a New York Giants fan, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting there still. It's been several years now. You finally started to see some semblance of a top tier quarterback. Didn't say he was a top tier quarterback. I said you started to see some semblance of it, especially when it comes to rushing touchdowns. At 7 last year. It is, of course, Daniel Jones. Your thoughts, my friend? Is this the make or break year for him for the New York Giants?
It is. I know they gave him a ridiculous contract, but there's kind of an out after year 2. So I think this is phase 1 of his next trial to see. Like, look, we drafted Jalen Hyatt. We got you Darren Waller. We got Saquon back for 1 more year. Let's make a run. I think from a fantasy perspective, I agree. He's definitely got value running wise. I mean, 7 running touchdowns or his career high. My concern with him, though, is just the accuracy and the turnovers. He cut down on them last year, but you're always going to have to deal with that. I don't envision him as a QB1, but I also advocate, even if you got a stud QB like Mahomes or Hurts or Allen, those guys could get hurt at any time. We've seen it happen in the playoffs. We saw it happen in preseason this year. I think he's a good number two. If you can, kind of be patient and wait around and not have to rely on him to be your anchor quarterback, he's a good serviceable backup and can fill in a bye week or if there's an injury.
One name that keeps getting tossed about in the chat right here at the Pop Culture Cosmos and Inside Sports Fantasy Football is Jimmy Garoppolo, who is now the guy here in Las Vegas. Your thoughts on this? I mentioned in the chat if Devontae Adams stays upright, he could have a pretty good season because Josh Jacobs seems to be the persona non grata right now when it comes to fantasy football drafts. Your thoughts though on what Jimmy Garoppolo can do this season?
I think there's value there, and he's one of these guys that kind of gets forgotten. And if you're lucky to have him as a backup, sometimes down the stretch, he's your starter as long as he's healthy. He puts up
I put him around
numbers.
10 to 15.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to have him on my team. Don't want him as a starter. If that's the case, I would hope it's a case where not that I want my starter to get hurt, but you're forced to start him because of an injury. I do agree with you. I think Adams will benefit him. The whole Josh Jacobs thing, though, kind of worries me. If they can get that straightened out and they can get him playing and off of Austin Eckler's disgruntled Zoom call, I think that bodes well for Garoppolo. But again, with him, given his age and his injury history, if you're going to take a flyer on him and really want to wait and make him your starter, you better go get a backup shortly thereafter.
One of the things that we got to talk about before we head on out, my friend, and there's still plenty more to talk about on today's show, Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Truly appreciate you joining us once again. Is Austin Eckler and Josh Jacobs. We talked about name running backs who are no longer are at the top of the fantasy football list. Austin Eckler and Josh Jacobs both had great seasons last year, but their futures are a little bit in question, whether it's regarding what they feel, what they've been saying off the field, their futures, their directives from their teams, changing priorities, things of that nature. I have seen Josh Jacobs and also Austin Eckler near or at the top of people's do not draft lists. So your thoughts on both those guys once and for all. We'll get it out of the way. Your thoughts on Josh Jacobs and Austin Eckler this season?
I wouldn't put them on a do not draft list. That said, I wouldn't take them as high as you normally would, all things being equal. Maybe if they follow you later in the first round or early second round, grab them because, as we mentioned earlier, these are clear cut, bona fide number one RB1s, and they're going to put up numbers. Whether they're disgruntled or not, these guys have to play. There's money on the line. So, the cynic in me sometimes wonders if what Saquon and Jacobs have done is just I don't feel like going to training camp. I want a couple of weeks off. It'll freshen me. I don't want to be out there in the heat and humidity or whatever the case is of the summer. So I don't think you can avoid them at all costs because let's say you pass on them. Who's better than them? I mean, Tony Pollard's a starter in Dallas, but he's never been for a full season before. I like a guy like Nick Chubb. I think he could put up numbers, but with Deshaun Watson back, will that affect Chubb's touches? There are a lot of question marks behind them, so it's kind of hard to pass on guys like that. But to take them number 3, number 4 in the first round, no, I wouldn't do that.
Fair enough. I would not either right now. They're kind of like very tenuous what they're doing, what their position is. So if you can get them in the third round, you might want to go ahead and look there. If second round, maybe late second round, that's when you got to start thinking about them as possibilities because of if everything gets centered, if everything gets right with those two in their situations in both Los Angeles and Las Vegas respectively, then things will be a lot better for you. You can pull out with someone that could be a top line running back for you.
Yeah, and I mean, if they last past the second round, jump for joy. I mean, I think the poster child for all this is Le'Veon Bell. He completely regrets just taking a year off and was never the same. And I thought he was going to make all this money. So at some point, I mean, these guys are going to have to ball out. They're going to have to play. They're going to have to suck it up. And, I know in the grand scheme of things, they don't get paid what a Justin Herbert or Jimmy Garoppolo get paid, but they're getting paid millions of dollars regardless, and they know their shelf life is only so long.
One of the things I want to ask you is about the wide receiver position. Justin Jefferson he carried me to a championship game and was just sensational last season. He is now, and get this, my friend, it's one of the few times I've ever seen a definitive number one in fantasy football be a wide receiver. Back in the day when you and I first started playing, wide receivers were considered a dime a dozen, and you could probably get three or four, and in the middle rounds, and there you go, you're all good. Now these days, it's gotten to the point because the way, like we talked about on this show, the changing priorities of the NFL, where the passing game has become more and more a part of what we're doing or what we're seeing. The quarterback and the wide receiver have become the most paramount positions in fantasy football. So your thoughts on this, my friend? The wide receiver position is really something that you need to take a look at and need to prioritize as an importance for most fantasy football leagues.
You absolutely do. And in doing my research for our season opening episode, I looked at a number of different draft boards and preseason rankings, and there's Jefferson. If he's not number one, he's not. He's number two, and I can't say I'm entirely surprised. The guy's looking to get paid majorly. Adam Thielen's gone in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins loves throwing to him, and I think his production is going to be huge. I mean, we'll roll it back a year. Dom and I were sitting there debating, looking at each other. It's our turn to pick. Do we want Cooper Kupp? We've had before him, we love, or do we want Justin Jefferson? We ultimately decided to go with Kupp. Hindsight's 2020, but I don't think you can go wrong with Jefferson. I mean, you know,
I didn't.
you're living proof. But I mean, you look even past those two guys. Jamar Chase is really ranked highly, and
Yes.
I don't disagree with it. But I'm with you. Like 20 years ago, if you were to take a Jerry Rice number one, people would look at you like you're crazy, even though Jerry Rice is probably the greatest receiver of all time. Back then, you didn't do those sorts of things.
No, not at all. And the wide receiver was just someone that you could use as filler, because there was so many wide receivers that an 800-yard season would be considered like a pretty good season, a really good season if for many fantasy football owners, and that's what they were. Now these days, you're looking at 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 on up as far as being really good seasons for you and being productive seasons. So you need to make sure you have that depth at the wide receiver position because again, even though most leagues are still at the traditional two wide receiver, running back base, I've heard of some leagues changing and adopting to the different kind of styles, what's going on with the passing and a predominant amount of passing, and kind of leading towards a more wide receiver focused offense for their team owners.
Yeah, and that's definitely another trend that's morphed out of what's changed in the NFL itself. I mean, besides the fact this is the way offenses are being run and the less of an importance on running backs, let's face it, the rule changes favor two position players immensely. Don't hit the quarterback late, don't hit him low, and really cracking down on the pass interference and contact like from the football you and I grew up watching. It, I feel like now you touch a guy or do an old soccer flop and you're going to get pass interference. So you can't be as physical when you're a defensive back or a safety like you could back in the day. So who's that benefit? Wide receivers. And some people mock it. I don't have a problem with it. I get in the big picture, we got to prevent injuries and concussions and so forth. But, the detractors call it flag football. And what's flag football? It's a lot of throwing.
That for sure it is, but we'll see what the wide receiver position lays out. So I mentioned Jefferson. Yeah, obviously, there's other great receivers. You mentioned Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is just absolutely sensational for Cincinnati. He just does it. He's somebody that I think if Jefferson falls a little bit, could be at the top of the spot right there for you. So many other great receivers. Who stands out to you as far as wide receivers at the very top of your list for your upcoming draft?
Yeah, I mean, the guy for me would be Chase. If I can't get Jefferson, I can't get Kupp. I think you got to go all out to get Jamar Chase. Another guy who at some point is going to hit a huge payday. Burrow loves throwing to him. The guy just puts up numbers. So, I mean, that's my other favorite other than those big two. If you want to go a little deeper, like you had mentioned earlier with kind of the sleeper pick. And again, this is my version of a sleeper, just someone that might fall through the cracks, but people know about him. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit
Hmm.
Lions. I've had him in the past. He had a nice year last year. I think he's only going to get better, develop the rapport with Jared Goff. And let's
What a
face it,
great story. What a
yeah.
great story.
I mean, guy, what do you say? 31 receivers. I forget how many it was were drafted ahead of him, 20, whatever the number was, and how he cried on draft day. They set up this party and he wasn't picked on day one. And he's remembered all those guys that have been picked ahead of him. So this is a man on a mission. And then, two, with Jameson Williams, the highly touted receiver out of Alabama, being suspended for gambling, I think that's only going to benefit St. Brown's production in the first 6 weeks.
Absolutely. In fact that he comes from a place that I'm so fond of in University of Southern California. I saw him play firsthand. I thought he was a first round talent, and to go so far down and now getting to, like you said, he's getting a line to be paid a whole lot of money if he stays healthy. I'm looking forward to seeing if he can do just that. Once again, it is Chris Lardieri from the Dom-ination Sports Nation. Go ahead and check him out today, right there for you wherever you get your podcasts at the Dom-ination Sports Nation. Him and his son, Dominic Lardieri, go ahead and cover the sports world like no other. So go ahead and check him out today at the Dom-ination Sports Nation. It is the 2023 Fantasy Football Special. It is Gerald Glassford also here. Of course, you can catch me at the Pop Culture Cosmos, wherever you get your podcasts, twice a week, where we cover the latest news and trends of pop culture. And of course, the Lakers Fast Break. We have several shows a week that cover the Lakers and NBA. We're currently doing a ton of NBA team previews. We've got some waiting for you on the Eastern Conference. You want to go ahead and check it out today, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I do want to go ahead and mention, though, my friend, when it comes to what we're seeing, we always forget the tight ends. I understand a lot of people are saying it's Travis Kelce and everyone else. Is it Travis Kelce and everyone else still at fantasy football?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, I'm biased. I think it's worth keeping an eye on Darren Waller, but let's not forget about George Kittle. I mean, when he's healthy, he puts up monster numbers, and I think Brock Purdy, provided he's healthy as well, seemed to develop a nice rapport with him last year. So, I mean, you've got guys like that you can't overlook. I just don't think there's a drop off after Kelsey, but it's not as big as the experts tend to make it out to be.
Okay, because I've heard the word chasm. I've heard the word, when the word chasm pops up, that tells you that they think there's a deep drop off. They treat Kelsey more like he's a wide receiver with those kind of numbers, as opposed to being a relatively relating to the rest of the tight end crew that you could go ahead and draft from. Some people actually specifically target him in their first 3 rounds so they don't have to worry about a tight end. Is that something people need to consider for their fantasy football draft?
In that respect, I do agree. I feel like Kelsey's a wide receiver, and if you're in a league where you've got that tight end spot as opposed to making it some sort of like adjustable flex, or it could be wide receiver, tight end, then yeah, you should go grab him in the first 3 rounds. But while I like Kelsey, if he's not available for me, I don't lose sleep over it. There are other guys that are out there. I mean, I've been on the Kyle Pitts bandwagon one of these years. I hope it pays off. But you look at a guy like TJ Hawkinson, who got traded in the middle of the season from the Lions to the Vikings, and Cousins managed to find him down the stretch for touchdowns. So I think he's got upside too. So there are guys like that out there. They're not that elite tier one Kelsey, but they're going to put up more numbers than your average run of the mill fantasy tight end.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure because, again, as it keeps on talking about, and I see it as far as in pre-rankings from all over the place, as far as whoever has their top 100 to 200 fantasy football players. Kelsey is usually the only one in that upper stratosphere as far as tight ends concerned. So I just wanted to make sure and give some people out there some pause before they have to commit to Travis Kelsey, unless they really feel the way that their draft's falling to him, that they have to go ahead and pick him up now to commit to a tight end that's going to produce for them long term.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you want him, you better grab him early. If not, I'm not going to cry if I get Mark Andrews from the Ravens, because Lamar Jackson's back and he likes him.
There you go. Absolutely. So that's another individual that I want to talk to you about. This Lamar Jackson, who we had at this time last year at that top level. As far as what he can do, what he was actually playing at an MVP level for a great portion of the season. Your thoughts on what he can do? I think he can come back and have an outstanding season. Your thoughts on Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, I definitely agree. He could be a Jalen Hurts type player. The worry with him now with the contract situation out of the way is just staying healthy. So if you do take him, don't think, all right, I'm an autopilot. I don't even need a backup quarterback. I'll just wait and fill that roster spot one of these weeks down the road. You better get yourself a serviceable backup. Not that I know how to predict injuries or anything, but the history is what it is. And a guy like that who runs a lot can be prone to injury. But I do feel too that he's probably been devalued some, and I don't want to say underrated, but people forgot how great he was last year at the beginning.
That's true. But the thing is with him, it's not just about his health, but also the array or lack thereof of receivers that he has. You talked about Mark Andrews being his favorite option. It's usually by necessities because the wide receivers, for the most part, have been underperforming to say the least.
Yeah, I know he's got OBJ, but let's face it, he's coming off an ACL, didn't play last year. He's not a wide receiver one like he was in his heyday, but at least they've got him something. It's better than what they've had, but I agree with you. It's not the greatest class of receivers.
And that's the thing. Until they get him something where he can go ahead and have some options on the wings that are consistent and healthy and actually get defenses scared and actually can produce, it's going to be tough to put him with the other three guys. But I think that, if anybody out of the number of quarterbacks that can compete, Burrow, if he is healthy come the start of the season, is obviously an option as well. But I think Lamar Jackson, if anybody can break into that top three in quarterbacks this year, I think it still can be him. Although you like Trevor Lawrence, and that's not a bad deal as well.
Yeah, but I mean, is Lawrence a top three? I don't know. I mean, I think he can make the move upward into the single digit rankings, but I do feel Jackson's got that upside thanks to his running ability.
Absolutely. So I ask you, my friend, it comes down to it. It's here. These teams, these owners will be starting to go ahead and formulate their strategy. And again, as we had in the chat, some people were looking and thinking about doing their first fantasy football league. The advice again is I'd go for a free league. Somebody tries to con you into a pay league at work. I don't think that's going to be working out very much for you because, again, a lot of these leagues that you go into have a lot of savvy owners that like to feast on the one and done team owners that are out there. Just go ahead, play for free, play for fun, get to know it, get to learn it, see if you like it and enjoy it before you go ahead and commit to something larger. But when it comes to the draft itself, my friend,
Mm-hmm.
you and I have very different strategies on what we go ahead and do. We've been on the show, we admit it, but we both have found success, great success. Even last year, you said with the struggles, you still found success last year. You and I were both in the playoffs. And at one time, we thought we might meet each other in the championship game. So I want to hear your thoughts, my friend. As guys who have won leagues before, you probably won more than I have, but I've won a couple leagues over the years myself in the times I play it. But I usually play pretty well. I usually finish pretty well for the most part. As long as I don't get a myriad of injuries, that's like every other team owner out there. But
Yeah.
your thoughts on devising a strategy and coaching them to see what they can do to go ahead and have a successful season out there.
So you've got to have rankings. I don't endorse any particular one. I tend to hop around from year to year.
Mhm.
My advice is don't have too many rankings. I mean, have one, have it sorted by players. Make sure if you're in a PPR league that you select the right one, whether it's half point or 1 point. Those will affect the rankings that you're looking at as well. And then, too, if you like it, maybe a top 150 overall. I feel like those help in the earlier rounds where you say, hey, this guy fell. I'm getting some value taking someone ranked 12th in the third round. So after that, that's just more of a thing to scratch off guys are like, all right, I need a kicker. I need a fourth running back. Who can I take a flyer on? So make sure you have that. For me, I'm not beholden to those rankings. I use them as kind of a guide. I try and watch football, read about it, look at guys who I think had good years or might have even more production from year to year, or on teams with favorable, I don't want to say matchups, but in the case of Trevor Lawrence, for instance, I think the Jags, all things being equal, are poised to have another big year. Same thing with the Eagles. So there may be guys you want from those teams, and then I think you need to take kind of this 30,000 feet view and look at your draft board, and whether you write it down or track it on Yahoo or ESPN, if you're doing an online draft, make sure you're not stacking up on one particular position too much. I'm not going to advocate that you take 4 wide receivers in the first round. Sometimes you need to take into account bye weeks. I don't think it's the end all be all, but if your top 2 running backs both have the same bye week, then you better account for that later on in the draft. So those sorts of things, you want to fill in the early rounds, you want to get the best players, but then you want a well-rounded roster as the draft goes on. And then two, kickers and defenses. I've seen defenses taken way too early over the years, and yeah, there have been some great teams that put up points on defense. But if you were to look at the top two scoring defensive teams in fantasy versus like the 8th or 10th, I don't think the spread is as wide as people make it out to be. Me personally, I feel like I flip defenses a lot through the year, so don't waste a valuable middle round pick on a defense, and especially not a kicker.
Sound advice right there for you. One of the things I also want to go ahead and say, as far as in your draft, don't panic if the guys that you're looking forward to are not going to be there. There's a likelihood when you're drafting in a 10 or 12 team or 14 team league that the guy you choose or you're targeting is probably not going to be there by the time it gets to you. So have options. Have options and be willing to go ahead and be able to change directions on a moment's notice and be able to have options for you after that. Let's say you want to go ahead and make sure you start out with running backs. And if the draft is not falling that way, make sure you have options at wide receiver that you are comfortable with, that if it changes, go ahead and make sure you have that. If the quarterbacks are not falling the way you want to go ahead and the ones are not coming to you, make sure you have a plan as far as a quarterback or 2 quarterbacks, because backup quarterbacks are necessary. A solid backup quarterback is necessary in your league. Then make sure you have that as a plan as well. But yes, I agree with Chris. Defenses, I mean, uh, it's so random on how defenses can really score for you. It could be the lousiest defense in the league, but show up for you at the right time with a 20-point game because of a couple interceptions. They could still lose, yeah, 35-14. But because they get 5 sacks and 2 interceptions, that still could get you a lot of points. So, yeah, it's tough to figure out on the defenses for a lot of occasions. But a kicker, my friend, I might be a little bit once it gets into right around 9th, 10th, 11th round, you might want to start thinking about that. Just think about it, because a good kicker, it's like a no-brainer. You just have him there, he scores for you, and if he's on a good offensive team, that really could just, it's just like you get him, you're done. If you get a good kicker, you're done. If you get a bad kicker or an inconsistent kicker, man, that gives you another headache you don't need.
Yeah, I agree with that. We got Harrison Butker last year, and although he got hurt and annoyed us at times, by the end of the season we were happy to have him. But what I'm referring to is I don't advocate taking a kicker defense in the 6th or 7th round. Once you get to that, double digit round or maybe even 9th. I mean, if Justin Tucker's still around the 9th round, I'm not going to shoot you a dirty look for taking him. Guys pretty much Mr. Automatic and will get you just squared away with points every week. But don't go reaching because Justin Tucker got taken by your Ravens fan in your league in the 6th round. Don't think you've got to go out there and draft a Butker immediately.
Absolutely. But some sound advice right there from Chris Lardieri. Please go ahead and check him out today, along with his awesome son, Dominic Lardieri, right there for you, the Dom-ination Sports Nation. Now that we're back for our fully fleshed out 5th season right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football, we're going to be coming at you each and every week with the best in fantasy football talk. We come at you hard. We come at you fast. We'll come at you with the doghouse. Woof, woof, woof. Don't think I forgot about that. That'll be a great part of the season as well. But I'm not going to have you pick any underdogs for the exhibition season right now.
Heck no.
Yeah. I may hit you up before the season in regards to an underdog for over unders for win totals. So that I
I
may
like
hit you up
that.
with. Yeah. So might do that before we start the season. But before we head on out, it's time for you to give the hard pitch, my friend. Why people need to check out you and your awesome son, Dom, for the Dom-ination Sports Nation.
Well, we started this podcast during the pandemic. Dom, my son, who's now in high school, came to me and said, "Dad, can we do a podcast?" And you asked Gerald, and thankfully he obliged and taught us the tricks of the trade. And we've been doing a show ever since. We kind of, for lack of a better term, I'm the old fart, and he's the young Gen Zer, and we give our perspective on sports. Been on a bit of hiatus as Dom has been busy this summer with taking a class and football practice, but we're going to get started up again. NFL season will bring Dom back out of retirement, and soon enough he'll be appearing here with us on Inside Sports Fantasy Football. But if you want a show with two different perspectives, Gen X and Gen Z, just a dad and his son talking sports and being frank. I mean, we had Gerald on over the summer to go over the NBA and the finals and enjoyed the heck out of it. So we'll
As did I.
we'll yeah, definitely. And we talk anything and everything, but Dom does like coming on here to talk his fantasy football, and he puts me to shame at times. So by all means, look for us wherever you find podcasts. It's Dom-ination Sports Nation. You can follow me on Threads or Twitter at Chris L Sports. You can follow the show on Instagram at Dom-ination Sports Nation.
And for us here, it's isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com. You want to send us your possible trade scenarios, lineup questions, anything relating to fantasy football, hit us up there. Or Inside Sports FF on Twitter/X, whatever it's going to be today. We're on Threads, Inside Sports FF as well. In Instagram, you can go ahead and send us there. But probably the best place to get us is either on, of course, like I said, Twitter or Inside Sports Fantasy Football right there for you here below on the Pop Culture Cosmos on YouTube or isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com. Well, my friend, it's been great talking to you. Appreciate this a little bit longer version, but it's our preview, getting back into the swing of things. Any last thoughts, my friend, before we head on out?
I'm with you. I think for me, a lot of times the highlight of football season is a draft. If you have the ability to do one in person, whether it's with coworkers or friends, Dom's got a league with his buddies and they're trying to do it in person. By all means, do it. I mean, I've got just great memories of my previous job. Every year we'd meet this time, late August, early September, go to a local watering hole or restaurant and do the draft and just talk crap and compare our teams at the end. And it's just a lot of fun. If you can't, I mean, I think the online variety, I don't endorse a particular one. We happen to use Yahoo. I think it's user friendly. It's easy to do, and it can get the job done quickly. If you're busy and got kids and responsibilities, you can knock out a Yahoo 10-team draft in no time. But regardless of what happens, enjoy it, because no matter what happens, you get that grade from Yahoo, for instance, they give you a C plus, and Gerald and I have done this every year since we've been doing the show. Can you believe this crap? I got a C plus from Yahoo. I know my team's better than that.
And you
Everyone
were
thinks they've got
dominating
a
the league most
yeah.
of last season.
So go figure. But everyone's got a winning team right after the draft. That's the beauty of fantasy football. In your mind, your team's a winner.
A long way from pen and paper, my friend. A long way. So for Chris Lardieri from the Dom-ination Sports Nation, this is Gerald Glassford. Want to thank you so much for listening. It's another beautiful day in paradise right here in the Pop Culture Cosmos and Inside Sports Fantasy Football. We truly want to thank you for listening. And here's hoping you have yourself a great day. And good luck in your fantasy leagues. And we'll see you next week on Inside Sports Fantasy Football.